The Bloodiest Hill, The Real Horror of Okinawa. April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday. As American Marines waded ashore on Okinawa, many expected another hard-fought island battle. 82 days later, over 200,000 people would be dead. More civilians would perish here than in the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. This wasn't just a battle, this was a descent into hell where the line between soldier and civilian, between war and massacre, dissolved completely. By early 1945, Japan's defeat was inevitable. Iwo Jima had just fallen, costing nearly 7,000 Marine casualties for 8 square miles of volcanic rock. Now American planners needed Okinawa. At 60 miles long, it could stage the entire invasion of Japan's home islands. Admiral Chester Nimitz called it the Keystone of the Pacific. But Okinawa wasn't just a military target. It was home to nearly 300,000 civilians, ethnic Okinawans who had maintained distinct cultural traditions for centuries before Japanese annexation. Now, these people were trapped between two empires in total war's final phase. Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima commanded 110,000 Japanese troops defending the island. His orders were clear: make the Americans bleed so badly they'd negotiate peace instead of invading Japan. His chief of staff, Lieutenant General Isamu Cho, was a fanatical hardliner who'd participated in atrocities in China. Together, they weaponized everything on Okinawa, including its civilian population. On April 1st, 60,000 American troops stormed ashore, expecting apocalyptic resistance. Instead, they met almost none. Private First Class Eugene Sledge, whose memoir With the Old Breed documented the battle's horror, remembered, "It was almost unbelievable. We had expected hell and we walked ashore standing up." But Ushijima hadn't abandoned Okinawa. He'd refused to fight on American terms. The real Japanese defense waited in the south, in a nightmare landscape of ridges, ravines, and caves. For months, he'd turned this terrain into an interconnected fortress. Ancient Okinawan tombs, stone structures built into hillsides, became pillboxes and fighting positions. By mid-April, American forces slammed into the Shuri line, anchored on Shuri Castle. The terrain became a litany of suffering. Kakazu Ridge, Sugarloaf Hill, Half Moon Hill, Horseshoe Ridge. Each name written in blood. Sugarloaf Hill became emblematic of the battle's horror. This unremarkable 50-foot rise was connected by tunnels to Half Moon and Horseshoe Ridge. Between May 10th and 18th, the 6th Marine Division made 11 separate attacks. All failed. First Lieutenant Francis West described the nightmare. You couldn't see the enemy. You'd take the hill, then artillery would tear you apart. You'd withdraw and the Japanese would reoccupy through tunnels. The next day, you'd do it all again. In 10 days, the division suffered 2,600 casualties for one hill. Companies that began with 200 men were down to 30 or 40. Sergeant Jim Day, who received the Medal of Honor, later said, "It was beyond description. The worst I ever saw." From late April through May, torrential rains turned Okinawa into a swamp. Roads became rivers of mud, tanks bogged down, the wounded drowned in shell holes, bodies decomposed everywhere. The smell was overpowering. Eugene Sledge wrote, "The mud was knee-deep. Everywhere rotting corpses, Japanese and Marine. The stench was almost unbearable. The worst thing was the flies. You couldn't eat without flies covering your rations." Combat effectiveness collapsed. Men stopped sleeping. Some stopped caring. By late May, psychiatric casualties exceeded physical wounds in some units. Military psychiatrists had never seen anything like it. The battle was destroying men's minds. While Americans and Japanese slaughtered each other, Okinawa's civilian population was being systematically destroyed. The Japanese military had spent months propagandizing civilians about American atrocities, telling them Marines would rape, torture, and murder everyone. Japanese soldiers forced civilians into caves as human shields, then sealed entrances to prevent surrender. Soldiers provided grenades for group suicides. They murdered civilians who possessed food the army wanted. American forces, fighting an enemy hiding among civilians, contributed to the death toll through massive firepower. Artillery, naval gunfire, and airstrikes killed tens of thousands. At the southern cliffs, hundreds of civilians jumped to their deaths rather than surrender. Some believed the propaganda, some were following orders, some were pushed. Private Bob Green witnessed mass suicides at the cliffs. That's when I knew this wasn't just war anymore. War has rules, even terrible ones. This had no rules at all. The final civilian death toll remains disputed. Conservative estimates suggest 65,000 Okinawan civilians died. Some historians place it closer to 150,000. For comparison, Hiroshima's atomic bomb killed 70 to 80,000 immediately. Okinawa exceeded this over 82 days. By late May, the Shuri line crumbled, but Ushijima brilliantly withdrew his forces south to continue fighting. On June 4th, the rain stopped. On June 18th, General Buckner was killed by artillery, one of the highest-ranking American officers killed in combat. On the same day, Ushijima and Cho committed ritual suicide in their final cave. By June 22nd, organized resistance ended. The casualties tell the story. American losses, 50,000 total, including 12,500 dead. Japanese military, 110,000 killed, only 7,400 captured, near total annihilation. Navy losses, 10,000 casualties including 5,000 dead from kamikazes. And the civilians, at minimum 65,000 dead, possibly twice that. These weren't soldiers. They were farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, children, grandparents. Combat historian William Manchester, a Marine veteran of Okinawa, wrote, "We had entered a kind of primitive, savage state. We lived like animals and fought like animals." The psychological impact was profound. Many veterans never spoke of it. Eugene Sledge suffered nightmares for years. But the most significant impact was on American leadership. Casualty rates at Okinawa, projected to an invasion of Japan, produced estimates of 500,000 to 1 million American deaths. These projections directly influenced the decision to use atomic weapons. President Truman, reviewing Okinawa's reports, wrote, "Shall we invade Japan proper, or shall we bomb and blockade? That is my hardest decision to date." For Okinawans, the battle destroyed their society. Post-war Okinawa remained under American occupation until 1972. Ancient sites, including Shuri Castle, were destroyed. Many Okinawans felt betrayed by both sides. The Japanese military used them as shields. The Americans destroyed their island. Today, the Okinawa Peace Memorial Museum bears the names of all known dead, military and civilian, Japanese, American, and Okinawan, on stone walls facing the sea. The inscription reads, "We pray for eternal peace and pledge to convey the lessons of war to future generations." The Battle of Okinawa forces impossible questions. When does military necessity become war crime? When does self-defense become atrocity? American firepower in populated areas killed tens of thousands of civilians. Japanese forces deliberately used civilians as shields and drove them to suicide. Okinawan civilians had no stake in this war, but bore its worst consequences. Eugene Sledge, reflecting decades later, wrote, "We had descended to a level of savagery I never imagined humans could reach. But we did it. We all did it. And I don't know if what we did was right or wrong. I just know we did it, and I have to live with that." The Battle of Okinawa ended on June 22, 1945. 6 weeks later, atomic bombs fell. The war ended, but for Okinawa, the war never really ended. American bases still occupy a fifth of the island. The political tensions persist. But Okinawa is also a living memorial. The Peace Museum draws hundreds of thousands of visitors. Survivors share their stories while they still can. The message is consistent. This must never happen again. Over 200,000 people died in 82 days. The proportional scale is almost incomprehensible. The Battle of Okinawa showed us the face of total war. It was absolutely horrifying. Private Sledge closed his memoir with these words, "The killing was savage and endless. We had become hardened to suffering and death. But Okinawa haunted us all. It showed us what we were capable of becoming. The dead of Okinawa deserve to be remembered, not as numbers, not as strategic analysis, but as human beings who suffered and died in ways that should never be repeated. Their legacy is a warning. written in blood across a small island most Americans had never heard of. We remember them, and we remember why we must never return to that kind of war again.